All right, here is our first day on absolute value equations. So we're on Unit 1, Lesson 11, Day 1. So we're going to spend a couple of days talking about absolute value equations. So today we're just going to look at the very basics of it. We're going to be able to solve these equations that have absolute values in them and check to make sure that our solutions work in the original problem. That's going to be our goal for today. So just for a little warm-up here, I know you've seen these absolute value problems before, a lot of times with order of operations. So let's just make sure that you can remember how to use that absolute value. So go ahead and pause your video right now and see if you can do those first two warm-ups. So we'll remember that absolute value means how far the number inside is away from zero, the distance from zero. Absolute value is the distance the number inside is from zero. So in order to figure out how far the number inside is from zero, you have to perform any operations inside the absolute value before we can figure out how far it is from zero. In this case, we'd always want to follow order of operations. So here, I would need to do what is negative 7 plus 5 before I can take that absolute value into account. So negative 7 plus 5 is negative 2. So this problem is really saying, what is the distance that negative 2 is away from zero? So distance can never be negative, which means that absolute value is going to turn that distance into a positive 2. So negative 2 is 2 units away from zero. All right, so if I look at number 2 over here, again, I have to do this operation inside first. So 14 minus 6 gives me 8. So this is saying, what is the distance that 8 is away from zero? Well, an absolute value never turns that distance negative. You can't have a negative distance. So instead of saying that would be negative 8, our distance that 8 is away from zero is just 8 units. So when you have the absolute value of a positive number, your answer is still a positive number because it's a distance, and a distance is never negative. Okay, hopefully that brought back some memories. Hopefully you guys are pretty confident and understand what absolute value is. What you probably have never done before is, how do I use that when I'm solving an equation? So here's our first example. So number 1 here says the absolute value of x equals 8. So really, what we're thinking here, what this equation is asking us to find is, what are the possibilities for a number to be 8 units away from zero? Right? Now that seems like a crazy way to look at that very simple equation, but that's really what that absolute value is representing, right? So what could I get for a number that I could put inside the absolute value that I would have that would be 8 units away from zero? So if you think about it on a number line, which we won't have to do this every time, but just to wrap your brain around what these equations mean. Here's 0, so I want a possibility that would be 8 units away from zero. Well, I could have one possibility that's over here at positive 8, right? So x could equal positive 8. That is 8 units away from zero. But I could also have negative 8, right? Negative 8 would be 8 units away from zero as well. So when we're talking about these absolute value equations, we're always going to have, or I should say usually going to have, 2 answers, because the number of units away from zero could be the number of units to the left of zero, and it also could be the number of units to the right of zero. So here, the absolute value of x equals 8, I have 2 possibilities. X could equal 8 or negative 8. Okay, now number 2 says, what are the possibilities for a number that would be negative 3 units away from zero? Well, negative 3 units away from zero. I don't even know how to do that, right? I can't have a negative distance. It will never work. There are no possibilities where the distance from 0 is a -3. So you do have to be careful. There are some situations with these absolute value equations that don't work. This would be a no solution. Whenever you have an absolute value equal a negative number, that's when you have a no solution. So you got to keep your eyes open and be ready for those possibilities to pop up. All right, now those were very basic, just x inside the absolute value, but we know that we can get a little more complicated than that. So here's where it starts to get tricky. So now I'm trying to think of what values could I have for x here when I have the absolute value of 4x equals 88. What numbers would I plug in for x so that after I plug it in and simplify this, right, that number, the distance from 0 has to be 88. So this is sometimes a little bit tricky for students to kind of wrap their brains around. I'm going to use a highlighter instead of that pen. So I need that this 4x, after I plug in for x, this 4x could turn into positive 88, right, to the right, or it could turn into negative 88 to the left. So again, I'm just going to jot this on a number line. You don't have to use the number line, but if it helps you, just visualize what's going on, right? So I could have my distance be 88 units to the right. So this 4x could equal a positive 88. But this 88 could also be 88 units to the left, right? So 4x could equal negative 88. So I'm taking what's inside the absolute value and I'm leaving it how it is, but I know that it could either be 88 units to the right or 88 units to the left. So what I'm changing is what it equals, and that's where I have my two possibilities. That what's inside can't turn positive or negative, that stays put. 4x is 4x. But I know that it has to be 88 units away from 0. So it could be positive 88 units away or negative 88 units away. And then I need to actually do my solving to figure out what x is going to actually be. So over here I'd have x equals positive 22. And over here I would have x equals negative 22. So I have, again, two possibilities here. X could equal 22 or negative 22. Now if we go and plug those in, let's just think if that makes sense. 4 times positive 22 is positive 88. That would be 88 units away from 0. 4 times negative 22 would be negative 88. That would also be 88 units away from 0. All right, so those are our two possibilities here. So now on number 4, same idea, right? I have to think of this part that's inside my absolute value. Whatever that ends up being has to be 2 units away from 0. So here's 0. So that x minus 9 could be 2 units to the right of 0. So I could have x minus 9 equals positive 2. It has to be 2 units to the right, whatever I get for that x minus 9. But it could also be 2 units to the left of 0. So I could have x minus 9 equals negative 2. So again, notice my absolute value is not changing that minus 9 into a plus 9. That's not how it works. I have to know what x is before I could do anything inside the absolute value. So when I have this, I'm saying, okay, whatever that ends up being, it could either be 2 units to the right of 0 or it could be 2 units to the left of 0. So that whatever's inside the absolute value is staying put, and you have to change your number on the right to be either positive 2 units or negative 2 units. Okay, and then I'm just going to solve it out here. So I'm going to add 9, so I get x equals 11 from this one. And over here I'm going to add 9, and I'm going to get x equals 7. So notice on this one, I have 2 different numbers, right? In the past, I had just a positive and negative of the same number, but here now I have 2 different numbers. Let's just double check then. If I plug in my positive 11 minus 9 would give me positive 2. That is 2 units away from 0. If I plug in my positive 7 Positive 7 minus 9 gives me negative 2. Negative 2 is also 2 units away from 0. I just noticed I forgot my negative on my number line there. So it's okay to have two different numbers. It just depends on what you have inside that absolute value. You should always have two numbers. Sometimes it'll be positive and negative of the same number. Sometimes it'll be two different numbers. Just make sure that you do a little mental math. Go back and check and see if they make sense after you get your two solutions. All right, so hopefully you're getting the hang of it, getting the idea, right? So the idea is that as soon as you see an absolute value equation, you got that absolute value by itself over on that equal sign, you're going to split it into the two options. So whatever is inside the absolute value has to stay put. You can't do anything to that until you know what x is. What's going to change is I can know that it could be 6 units to the right of 0 or 6 units to the left of 0. So what you're actually going to be changing is that number on the right-hand side, what it equals. So one possibility here is 2x plus 8 would be positive 6 units to the right of 0. I could also have that 2x plus 8 equals negative 6 units to the left of 0. So you don't have to always draw that number line. I was drawing that to help you kind of wrap your brain around what we were doing here. What you do need to do is always set up those two different equations and then solve each one. So here now is a little bit more going on to solve. So I have 2x equals negative 2. And then I divide by 2. So I have x equals negative 1 as one of my possibilities. All right. Now let's find out what the other one is. I'm going to subtract 8 over here, so I get 2x equals negative 14. Divide by 2, and I get x equals negative 7. So my two possibilities on this one are negative 1 and negative 7. Again, two different numbers. Let's just double check here. 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. Negative 2 plus 8 is positive 6. That is 6 units away from 0. If I plug in the negative 7, 2 times negative 7 is negative 14. Negative 14 plus 8 is negative 6, which is 6 units away from 0. So both of those do work. Notice I'm not necessarily writing that down, that mental check, but I am kind of going through the process to make sure that my numbers make sense. Until you get confident in your process, I definitely recommend that you do that mental math. Okay, so here now again, I'm going to split it into two. I have to be negative 3 units away from 0? Wait a minute. Hopefully that one jumped out at you right away. So, this doesn't quite work. I can't be negative 3 units away from 0. Let me get it. There we go. Can't be negative 3 units away from 0. So before I even split anything apart, I know that my absolute value can never equal a negative number, so this one has to be a no solution. I threw that one in there so that you wouldn't just kind of go straight through these and start setting up equations without actually thinking about what you have here. So whatever it equals is the number of units away from 0, and it can't be negative 3 units away from 0. So that one is a no solution. All right, hopefully that got you the basics of your absolute value equation. So remember, stay organized, right? Have that good mental process of what absolute value means. Most absolute value equations have those two answers. It's easy to forget that second one, so make sure that you're separating your equation before you start to do any solving. You know, we made our two equations before we solved any of them. We set that red equation up and the orange equation up before I started solving anything. I highly recommend that you do that rather than solving one and then setting up the other, because you'll forget that second one every time. And then this last one says, check for extraneous solutions. Extraneous solutions just mean answers that don't work, so watch for no solutions is what this last bullet point really means, but that's good vocabulary for no solutions. It's called extraneous solutions. All right, now it is time for you to practice it up. Good luck.